Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive of us. Today, we're tackling something that I know a lot of you are interested in, and that is stress management,
Hmm.
especially, how to handle stress in a professional setting.
Yeah.
We've got a really, really interesting set of source material for this one.
Okay.
It's a bunch of expert answers, basically, to common interview questions, all about how to handle stress.
Oh, interesting.
So whether you got interviews coming up or just want to kind of understand how these skills, how they're viewed in the workplace,
Yeah.
this is going to be super insightful.
I think it's fascinating how much these answers kind of reveal about the mindset
Yeah,
that you need to not just survive, but to actually thrive
totally.
under pressure.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about how do you prioritize when you've got multiple deadlines
Right.
and they're all converging at the same time?
Uh,
Talk about a stress recipe, right?
yeah, yeah.
The expert answer brought up this thing called the Eisenhower matrix.
Okay.
Have you ever used that?
Absolutely. It's a classic for a reason. But it's more than just a to-do list. It forces you to actually think about the impact of each task, and then you categorize them based on urgency and importance.
Hmm.
So imagine, for example, you've got 3 deadlines.
Okay.
2 of them have really serious consequences if they're delayed, but the third one's a little less critical.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds pretty familiar.
Right.
So how does this matrix thing actually help you with that?
So it helps you to break down the tasks within each of those deadlines and then prioritize them.
Oh, okay.
So you can actually see, okay, what absolutely must be done first? What can maybe be delegated to someone else? What might even be worth negotiating an extension on?
Oh, that's interesting.
They gave an example in there that involved a situation just like that, where by using the matrix and then communicating really clearly with the stakeholders,
Hmm.
they were able to actually deliver on those most important projects on time without having to sacrifice quality.
That's a great point about the communication piece, too.
Yeah.
Because I think even under pressure, keeping everyone in the loop can make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
But let's talk about another curveball that can happen, which is
Mhm.
those unexpected project changes
Yeah.
that throw everything off track.
Ugh, the worst.
How do you adapt and manage the stress when that happens?
Well, they actually had a pretty dramatic example in the source material where a project needed a complete overhaul midway through.
Oh, wow.
So instead of panicking,
Yeah.
the expert focused on really quickly breaking down those new requirements, figuring out how the timeline would need to adjust, and of course, communicating all of those changes to everyone involved.
Right, because freaking out doesn't really help anyone.
No, it doesn't.
But I'm guessing staying calm in that kind of situation is a lot easier said than done.
Right.
Did they mention any specific techniques for that?
They emphasize practicing mindfulness, even in those super high pressure moments. And that could be something as simple as taking a few deep breaths before you react to anything, just to help you kind of stay grounded and think more clearly.
Yeah.
And they also said don't underestimate the power of leaning on your team for support.
Oh, that's good.
Even just voicing your concerns to a colleague can really help you to process the situation and come up with solutions.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder that we don't have to go it alone,
For sure.
But let's be honest, sometimes that work stress, it isn't just like a temporary spike.
Right.
It's like this constant hum
Oh, yeah.
in the
Yeah,
background.
definitely.
Did the experts offer any strategies for managing that more chronic kind of work stress?
They did, and they kind of went beyond the usual advice of make sure you're getting enough sleep and drinking water.
Right.
While mindfulness and regular exercise were mentioned, they also highlighted the importance of being really strategic with your time.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be things like blocking out specific time for focused work, setting boundaries to kind of prevent those distractions,
Right.
and even learning to say no to requests that don't really align with your priorities.
That last one is so hard for me,
It is.
especially for those of us who are people pleasers at heart.
Yeah.
But you're right.
It's important.
Sometimes saying no is the best way to actually protect your time and energy.
Absolutely.
Okay, now let's crank up the pressure a little bit.
Okay.
How do you stay productive during those super high intensity periods without sacrificing the quality of your work?
Well, the source material really emphasized a 2-part strategy here.
Okay.
Task management on the one hand, and then incorporating mindfulness techniques into your actual workflow.
Got it.
So on that task management side, breaking down those large projects into smaller, more manageable steps can make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, because it just feels less overwhelming that way.
Right, exactly.
But what about the mindfulness piece? What does that look like in practice?
It could be as simple as setting a timer to remind yourself to take short breaks throughout the day.
Okay.
Even just 5 minutes of focused breathing or a quick meditation
Yeah,
can help you to just reset your focus
totally.
and come back to your work with renewed energy.
Like a little mini recharge
Exactly.
for your brain. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about helping a stressed out colleague.
Okay.
We've all been there, right?
Definitely.
But
yeah.
sometimes it's hard to know how to offer support,
Yeah.
especially when we've got our own deadlines and stuff to worry about.
Right.
What did the experts suggest?
Their answer was all about active empathy.
Okay.
And it starts with truly listening to your colleague,
Yeah.
acknowledging their feelings without judgment.
Yeah.
And then you can start to offer some practical support, like maybe helping them to restructure some of their tasks, or even just sharing a mindfulness technique that works for you. But here's the key. Follow up with them.
Oh, it's a good point.
Even a simple, hey, how are things going, a few days later.
Yeah.
It shows that you genuinely care, and it can make a huge difference.
I think we often forget about that follow-up piece.
Yeah.
But you're right.
It matters.
It shows that you're not just offering empty words. Okay, let's be honest. We've all missed deadlines at some point.
For sure.
It can be so stressful.
Yeah.
How do you handle that situation, both emotionally and professional?
Well, they were very clear. Honesty and a commitment to learning from the experience are crucial.
Okay.
This means owning up to that missed deadline, analyzing what factors contributed to it,
Yeah.
and then using those insights to actually implement new strategies for managing your stress and your workflow.
So it's not about like beating yourself up.
Right.
It's about turning it into a learning experience.
Absolutely.
Speaking of learning, I'm always curious to hear how people disconnect from work,
Yeah.
especially during vacations.
Oh, yeah.
What strategies did the experts suggest for creating those boundaries?
So their approach had two main components. First, proactive planning. This means getting as much as you can done before you leave, setting clear expectations about your availability while you're gone,
Yeah.
delegating tasks effectively.
So it's all about kind of setting yourself up for success
Exactly.
before you even step away.
Yep.
What about actually disconnecting once you're out of the office?
Oh, that's the hard part.
Because sometimes, like, that mental off switch
It
is
is.
the hardest one to flip, you know?
Totally. And that's where that second component comes in. Being really intentional about engaging in activities that help you to recharge, whether it's spending time in nature, pursuing a hobby, just being fully present with loved ones.
Yeah.
The key is to choose activities that help you to truly disconnect from work
Yeah.
and restore your energy.
Like hitting the reset button.
Exactly.
So you can come back refreshed and ready to tackle those new challenges.
Absolutely.
But let's face it, sometimes work throws us some real curveballs.
Oh, yeah.
Like, imagine you're in a meeting and someone criticizes your work publicly. And to make it worse,
Oh, I hate that.
the feedback feels totally unfair. Outright.
Ugh, the worst. But the expert's answer here really emphasized the importance of maintaining your composure,
Yeah.
not letting your emotions get the better of you. So instead of getting defensive,
Mhm.
they suggested acknowledging the feedback publicly,
Okay.
but then requesting a private conversation to discuss it further.
Okay. So it's about kind of de-escalating the situation in the moment
Yeah.
and then finding a more appropriate setting
Right,
to
exactly.
have that, like, constructive conversation.
Yeah.
What if the feedback still feels unjustified?
Mhm.
Even after that private discussion, how do you advocate for yourself
Yeah.
without damaging your professional relationships?
That's where those clear communication skills that we talked about earlier really come in.
Yeah.
The expert recommended calmly and confidently presenting your viewpoint.
Okay.
Any supporting evidence that you have, really aiming to reach a mutual understanding with the person who gave you that feedback.
So it's about kind of knowing your worth and being able to articulate it effectively, even in challenging situations. But speaking of challenging situations,
Okay.
let's talk about this, because I feel like this is an all too familiar experience. Getting conflicting feedback
Oh, yeah.
from different supervisors.
Yes.
It's like being pulled in two different directions. Right.
Yeah,
And it can be so stressful.
absolutely.
But instead of kind of feeling paralyzed,
Mm-hmm.
the expert's advice was to focus on process.
Okay.
I'm intrigued. What does that look like?
So it starts with prioritizing the feedback based on your team's strategic objectives.
Okay.
Then if the feedback truly conflicts,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to seek clarification from both supervisors.
Oh, interesting.
Even a simple, hey, I'm working to integrate both of your perspectives here. Could we maybe discuss
Oh, I like that.
how to best move forward,
Yeah.
Can go a long way.
So it's about kind of taking ownership
Yeah.
and driving that conversation
Absolutely.
rather than letting the conflicting feedback kind of derail your progress.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Last question in this section. We've all tried stress management techniques that sounded great in theory,
Yeah.
but they didn't quite work out in practice.
Mm-hmm.
How can we learn from those experiences?
So they actually had a perfect example of this, and that's passive activities like watching TV.
Sure.
While it might feel good in the moment, it's not actually addressing those underlying causes of stress.
Right.
And they contrasted this with active strategies like exercise or mindfulness that can actually have an impact on both your body and mind.
So it's about finding techniques that actively engage you
Exactly.
rather than just providing a temporary escape.
Yep.
And those techniques are going to be different for everyone.
Absolutely. Experiment, find what resonates with you,
Yeah.
and don't be afraid to try something new.
That's great advice. We'll be back in just a moment to dive into some more in-depth strategies for managing workplace stress.
That's so true. Finding what works for you is like the key, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, shifting gears a little bit here. Let's talk about those times when personal issues start impacting our work.
Oh, yeah,
I'm sure we've all been there at some point.
for sure.
How do you suggest navigating that tricky territory?
Well, the source material really stressed the importance of taking a proactive and structured approach.
Okay.
And it starts with simply acknowledging that, these things happen. Everyone faces personal challenges at some point. The question is, how do you manage them so they don't completely derail your work?
Right, because ignoring them usually just makes things worse.
Exactly.
Did the experts offer any specific strategies for that?
They did. And they used a really compelling example. Imagine a family health crisis that started to affect the expert's ability to focus at work.
Oh, wow. They knew they couldn't just pretend everything was fine, so they took some concrete steps to manage the situation.
Okay, so what did that look like?
So first, they emphasized the importance of setting boundaries. This means creating clear separation between work time and personal time, so each has its dedicated space.
Okay.
During work hours, they focused on ruthlessly prioritizing tasks, delegating when possible, and being upfront with their team about potential limitations in their bandwidth,
Yeah.
without oversharing personal details, of course.
Right, yeah. That's a great point about finding that balance between transparency and privacy.
Absolutely.
Did they mention any other strategies for kind of coping with that stress?
Yeah, they talked about incorporating short mindfulness breaks into their day to help maintain focus and manage anxiety.
Oh.
And this part really stood out to me. They also suggested exploring resources like an employee assistance program.
Those are often overlooked.
Yeah.
But they could be such a valuable resource. It's a reminder that we don't have to go through tough times alone, right?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shifting gears again, let's imagine you're in a leadership role and you notice your team is showing signs of stress.
Okay.
How do you even begin to assess the situation and figure out what kind of support they need?
Well, the experts stress the importance of being observant and attuned to both the obvious and subtle signs of stress in your team.
Yeah.
Regular check-ins are essential for gathering direct feedback, of course.
Yeah.
But they also highlighted the need to pay attention to things like changes in productivity, absenteeism rates, even shifts in the team's overall dynamic.
So it's like being a detective, kind of looking for those clues that something might be off.
Exactly.
Once you've identified a potential problem, what concrete steps can you take to help your team manage their stress?
Well, the source material offered a pretty diverse toolbox of interventions. Adjusting workloads was a big one.
Okay.
Making sure tasks are distributed fairly and that no one feels overloaded. They also talked about providing additional resources or training if there are skill gaps that might be contributing to the stress.
That makes sense. Addressing those root causes can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Flexibility. Offering flexible schedules or work arrangements can be a game changer for people who are juggling multiple demands.
Yeah.
It shows that you trust your team and are willing to work with them to find solutions that benefit everyone.
It's about creating that supportive environment where people feel heard and valued.
Absolutely.
But leading a team isn't always easy, right?
No.
There are times when you need to be assertive to keep things moving forward, but you also need to show empathy and understanding.
For sure.
How do you balance those two things, especially when the pressure's on?
That's a great question. And the source material had a really insightful example.
Okay.
Picture this: a high-pressure project with a tight deadline looming. As a leader, you need to be clear and decisive about what needs to be done.
Right. No time for wishy-washy instructions in that situation.
Exactly. But here's the key. You can be assertive while still being mindful of your team's well-being. The experts recommend starting by clearly laying out the expectations and timeline, but also creating space for your team to voice any concerns they might have about the workload or the process.
That open communication is so crucial. It helps prevent resentment and builds trust.
Absolutely.
But let's be honest, sometimes as leaders, we're so focused on supporting our teams that we forget to take care of ourselves.
Oh, yeah, it happens.
How do you avoid burnout when you're the one at the helm?
The experts had some excellent advice for this, and it starts with self-awareness. They suggested regularly checking in with yourself to assess your stress levels and energy. Mindfulness techniques can be helpful for this.
Okay.
Are you noticing any physical signs of tension? Are your thoughts racing? Tuning into those early warning signs can help you course correct before things escalate.
That makes so much sense. But it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day whirlwind and ignore those signals. Did they offer any practical tips for preventing that overwhelm?
Absolutely. Proactive planning was a big one. They suggested revisiting tools like the Eisenhower Matrix to prioritize tasks and ensure you're focusing on the most important things first.
We talked about that earlier, but it's worth repeating. Sometimes going back to the basics is the best way to regain control.
Absolutely.
Anything else?
Leveraging technology can also be a game changer.
Okay.
Using project management software or even just a simple to-do list app can help you stay organized, track deadlines, and identify potential bottlenecks before they become major problems.
Those tools can be lifesavers. But let's be realistic. Even with the best planning and organization, there are times when our workload just feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
What do you do when you hit that wall?
The experts were very clear about this. Don't suffer in silence.
Yeah.
It's crucial to communicate openly with your team and your supervisors if you're feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
See if tasks can be redistributed, deadlines adjusted, or if there are any resources that could help you manage the workload more effectively.
It's that reminder that we're not alone. There's a whole support system in place if we're willing to reach out and ask for help. Okay, let's talk about a situation that can be incredibly stressful for anyone, regardless of their role. Facing a problem that has no clear solution.
Oh, yeah.
How do you even begin to tackle that kind of ambiguity?
Their advice for this one was surprisingly simple but powerful. Embrace the uncertainty.
Okay.
Instead of viewing it as a roadblock, try to reframe it as an opportunity for growth and innovation.
Great.
They gave a great example. Imagine a project that suddenly gets hit with a new regulation that threatens to completely derail everything.
Ugh, that sounds like a nightmare. How do you even begin to wrap your head around that kind of situation?
They suggested starting by taking stock of what you know and what you don't know.
Okay.
This can help you get a clearer picture of the situation and identify the areas where you do have some control.
Yeah.
Then focus your energy on those areas rather than getting bogged down by the unknowns.
So it's about finding those pockets of action, even in the midst of uncertainty.
Exactly.
Did they mention any strategies for actually moving forward once you've done that initial assessment?
They emphasized the power of breaking down the problem into smaller, more manageable steps.
Yeah.
This can help create a sense of progress even when the big picture feels overwhelming. And of course, communication is key.
Of course.
Keeping all stakeholders informed about the situation, the challenges, and the potential solutions can go a long way in managing expectations and preventing unnecessary anxiety.
Transparency really is the best policy in those situations. It helps build trust and keeps everyone on the same page.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Before we move on to our final section, I want to talk about a quality that seems essential for not just surviving, but thriving in the workplace. Resilience.
Yeah.
How do you develop that ability to bounce back from setbacks and keep moving forward?
The experts actually outlined a two-part approach to building resilience.
Sure.
The first part focuses on reflection, taking the time to really analyze setbacks and identify what role you played in the outcome, both positive and negative.
That's so important. But sometimes it's hard to be objective about our own mistakes.
It definitely takes practice. But this reflective practice helps you shift your perspective and start viewing those setbacks as opportunities for growth rather than dwelling on the negative.
It's that growth mindset in action. But how do you go beyond reflection and actually build that resilience muscle?
That's where the second part comes in. Proactive skill development.
All right.
The experts recommended seeking feedback from trusted colleagues and mentors to gain different perspectives on your approach and performance.
Okay.
Then, use that feedback to create a targeted plan for professional development.
So it's about combining that internal reflection with external input to create a roadmap for growth.
Mhm.
What kind of professional development did they suggest?
They were pretty open-ended here, acknowledging that the best approach will vary depending on your individual needs and goals.
Yeah.
It could involve formal training, self-directed learning, or simply seeking out more hands-on experience in areas where you want to improve.
Mm-hmm.
The main takeaway was that resilience isn't a fixed trait. It's something you can actively cultivate and strengthen over time.
That's such an empowering message. It means we have the power to shape our own ability to navigate challenges and bounce back stronger.
Absolutely.
Okay, last question in this section. Can you share a concrete example from the source material where managing stress effectively actually led to a positive outcome for a team or a project? I'm really curious to hear how this plays out in the real world.
They had a fantastic example that really highlighted the power of stress management in action.
Okay.
Picture this: a high-stakes project facing a massively compressed timeline due to some unforeseen circumstances.
Oh, no.
The pressure was immense, and the team's morale was plummeting fast.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster. How did they turn things around?
The expert in the source material took a two-pronged approach, focusing on both task management and stress reduction. On the task management side, they immediately reprioritized the project deliverables, ruthlessly cutting anything that wasn't absolutely essential to meet the new deadline.
So it's about making those tough decisions and focusing on what truly matters. But what about the stress reduction piece? How did they address that?
This is the part I found really inspiring. They implemented daily team mindfulness sessions.
Wow.
Even just a few minutes of guided meditation or focused breathing helped the team center their thoughts, reduce anxiety, and come back to the project with a renewed sense of focus.
It's amazing how much of a difference those small practices can make.
Right.
What was the overall impact on the project?
The results were remarkable. By managing stress levels, the team was able to think more clearly, collaborate more effectively, and even come up with some creative solutions to the challenges they were facing.
Wow.
Not only did they manage to keep the project on track despite the shortened timeline, but the final output was actually even better than they had initially anticipated.
Wow. That's incredible. It really shows that managing stress isn't just about feeling better. It's about performing better and achieving better results.
For sure.
We'll be back in just a moment with our final insights on stress management in the workplace.
Yeah, it's like a huge reminder that stress management, it's not just about feeling better, it's about, actually performing better, getting those good results.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It all
Mm.
ties back to what we were talking about before with that resilience and adaptability,
Hmm.
When you have the tools to manage your stress, you're just so much more equipped to navigate those inevitable curveballs that come with any challenging project, right?
For sure, for sure. Okay, before we wrap up, there's one last question from our expert source that I wanted to touch on. It's something that I've definitely struggled with in the past, so I'm really eager to hear your take on this. So imagine you're in a meeting and someone publicly criticizes your work, maybe even throws you under the bus a little bit. How do you handle that in the moment, especially if you feel like the feedback is totally off base? Yeah, that's tough. The expert's advice here really resonated with me. They said, no matter how unfair the criticism feels, your first priority has got to be to maintain your composure, your professionalism. Think of it as a chance to really showcase your grace under pressure.
Yeah, it's so much easier said than done when you're feeling flustered, though. Like, how do you actually pull that off?
Well, they had a really simple but effective technique. Publicly acknowledge the feedback without getting defensive. Just say, okay, I hear you.
Yeah,
And then request a private conversation to discuss in more detail.
okay.
This lets you de-escalate the situation in the moment, and it also creates a more appropriate setting to have a constructive conversation.
That's such a smart move. It shows that you're open to the feedback, but also that you want to address it in a respectful and productive way.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if, even after that private conversation, you still feel like the feedback was unjustified? How do you stand up for yourself without, damaging your professional relationships?
That's where those clear communication skills that we keep coming back to are so important. The expert recommended calmly and confidently presenting your perspective and any supporting evidence that you have, aiming to reach a mutual understanding with the person who gave you the feedback.
So it's about advocating for yourself while also keeping those lines of communication open?
Exactly. It's a delicate balance, but Honing that ability to communicate effectively, even under pressure, is a valuable skill for anyone who's navigating the workplace.
Well, I think we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive on stress management. It's been such an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it has.
Any final thoughts or takeaways you'd like to leave our listener with before we sign off?
If I could just offer one parting piece of advice, it would be to view stress management as this ongoing journey of self-discovery. You know, keep experimenting with different techniques, figure out what works best for you, and most importantly, remember that it's totally okay to ask for support along the way. Whether that's a trusted colleague, a mentor, or even a professional coach, there are people who can help you navigate those tough moments and emerge stronger on the other side.
That's such an important reminder. We don't have to go it alone. And as we've explored in this deep dive, there are so many practical tools and strategies out there to help us all manage stress, build resilience, and ultimately thrive in our work and our lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.